In this video, we're going to be talking about Duke Ellington, a very famous pianist and composer. So here's Duke. He's the best smile there is at a piano. So Duke Ellington was born on April 29th, 1899 in Washington, D.C. It's just right around the corner from us. And actually, both of his parents played piano. So he came from a very musical family, which is pretty cool. His mom tended to play what's called parlor music, and his dad preferred to play operatic arias. So that was kind of the beginning of his lifetime. And just as a reminder, because we've talked about now Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald. Louis Armstrong was born in 1901. Ella Fitzgerald was born in 1917. So they're all living through the 1900s, where we've got in the United States a lot going on is normal. But so things that we've talked about already, like World War I and the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression in the 1930s, then World War II, and then the Korean War and the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s. All of that stuff is going to be things that Duke Ellington also lived through, just like Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald. So we've already talked about that. And Duke Ellington started taking piano lessons at age 7 from Marietta Clinkscales was her name, which is a pretty cool name if you ask me. And during the time period when he was a kid, his mom was really focused on reinforcing his manners and like trying to teach him to act like a person who, in her mind, a person who like deserved respect. So just from whatever she taught him, he became really like comfortable and confident in social situations, and he dressed like more dapper than his classmates did when he was a kid. So his friends noticed all of those things and started calling him Duke because they thought he looked like a young nobleman. So that's a nickname that like stuck when he was a kid and continued into his adult life. And his name that he was born with was actually Edward Kennedy Ellington, but we know him as Duke Ellington, and that's where that comes from. So when he was a kid, he was actually more interested in baseball than piano, even though he was taking piano lessons. But he started concentrating more on music as he got older. So when he was 14 years old, he started sneaking into Frank Holiday's pool room to listen to. These guys are all pianists. Doc Perry, Harvey Brooks, and Blind Johnny were their names. So he started listening to them and got more serious about his piano lessons during this time. So when he turned 15, he actually wrote his first song, which apparently he's never recorded. It was called Soda Fountain Rag, and he wrote that while he was working as a soda jerk at, what is it called? At the Poodle Dog Cafe. So a soda jerk is a person, usually a young person, who operates a soda fountain in a drugstore. So usually that just means they're like preparing soda drinks and ice cream sodas and stuff like that. So that's what he was doing. And so he wrote Soda Fountain Rag. And he wrote it by ear because he had actually not learned how to read or write music yet. So he could not look at a piece of paper and be like, that's a quarter note, that's a C. He couldn't do that. So he was writing everything by ear, which is pretty cool. And he, after that, did learn how to read music from his high school music teacher, Henry Lee Grant, and a pianist named Doc Perry, was his nickname. He also started to learn how to project a professional like performing style and improve his playing technique. And he started playing gigs in cafes and clubs around Washington, D.C. And at that point, he actually ended up dropping out of school. He was in school at Armstrong Manual Training School, and he was studying art, and he dropped out 3 years or 3 months before graduating. So after he dropped out of school, he started working as a freelance sign painter. This is 1917, so he's 18 years old at this point. He was working as a freelance sign painter, but also trying to build his music career. So one of the things he would do is whenever he painted a sign for like a dance or for a party, he would ask the customers if they had musical entertainment, and if they didn't, he would offer to play for the occasion. So it was kind of like getting his name out there. He ended up starting his first musical group in 1917. They were called the Dukes Serenaders. And one thing that was unique about them was that they played for both black and white audiences, which we've talked about was not common for the time because it was still a very segregated society. So Duke Ellington played a lot of gigs and released a lot of albums through his whole life, and he had a lot of influence on jazz and also on uh, the civil rights movement that would kind of occur later in the 1900s. So one of the things that he did was compose a lot, and his compositions, he liked to allow for balance between the composer's vision of the song but also for improvisational talent. So he would write pieces where the composer could have a lot of influence on the way that the song was performed, but also then the individuals in the group were able to show off their talents and their skills at playing their instrument and at being able to improvise. So create music on the spot during their solos. And we kind of talked about that same thing with Louis Armstrong. He was influential in soloists being highlighted in jazz groups. So Duke allowed for the same thing, but from a composer perspective. He was also one of the originators of big band jazz, which is technically a genre, so a style of jazz music. But a big band can also be a name for a music ensemble. So it usually has 10 or more musicians with 4 sections. So it ends up being saxophones, trumpets, trombones, and a rhythm section. It's like percussion. Um, and that still ends up being like a genre of music. It doesn't necessarily, like, it started with those bigger groups, but then it doesn't have to be a big group. It's just kind of a style of music now that those groups would have played. um so it started as accompaniment for dancing, and this type of band does rely on like written compositions, which is where Duke Ellington came in. So the band leaders and the arrangers were more important for big band music. So Duke Ellington, who was a composer and an arranger, was really important in big band music because of what he was doing. Um, he also was one of the first African American musicians to celebrate his race and proudly use the word black in many of his song titles. So, some of the things that he wrote and recorded were Creole Love Call, Black and Tan Fantasy, Black Beauty, When a Black Man's Blue, Black Butterfly, Black, Brown, and Beige. All of those things he wrote and decided that he was going to use the term black instead of kind of shying away from that. He had several film appearances, and he and his musicians, one of the stereotypes, I guess, of the time period was that in film, black actors were often used as like comedy relief characters, and that kind of was just became a stereotype of the time period. So Duke and his musicians, in the times that they appeared in film, looked and acted like, the description is distinguished artists. So they were avoiding going along with the stereotypes of the time, which had an influence on black musicians and actors just who came up after that. So he was a big deal for a lot of reasons. And Duke Ellington died on May 24th, 1974. It was due to complications of lung cancer and pneumonia. His funeral was actually attended by 12,000 people, and it was at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. So there's a couple of recap facts here. His name was Duke Ellington, but he was born with the name Edward Kennedy Ellington. He lived from 1899 to 1874. He was born in Washington, D.C., and he's famous for jazz and swing and technically big band jazz as well, which kind of falls under just one of the categories of jazz. Also, random fun fact, Duke Ellington's 70th birthday party was celebrated with a jam session, and President Richard Nixon attended this party. So, what we're going to listen to right now is a song that Duke Ellington wrote. It's called Take the A Train. And this is a recording from, or it's a video and a recording from 1964. And at the beginning, you get to hear Duke Ellington talk a little bit before he goes and actually sits at the piano. So this is a little bit different from what we've listened to before, because Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald were both singers. In addition to Louis Armstrong also played the trumpet, but Duke Ellington is not the main focus of this group. He is the piano player, so you can hear him throughout the song, but he's not the main focus for the whole song. So you have to look for him. So here is Duke Ellington and his band here performing Take the A Train.
It's my pleasure to introduce the eminent composer, orchestrator, Billy Strayhorn. A flat for Billy Strayhorn, huh? Billy Strayhorn, my writing and arranging companion. He wrote our theme, Take the A Train. And now we'd like to do a very special operatic version of Take the A Train.
Take the A train if you want to get to Harlem in a hurry. You take the Z train if you want to get to Bronx, baby, in a hurry. I'll be the do
Ernie Shepherd.